Hello, YouTube. So what you're about to watch is my interview with the authors of a book titled Career Dharma that came out not too long ago. You'll hear in the beginning of the production my little take on what the book means, my little summary of the book, but I'll just quickly give you a summary of the authors. So Dr. Urmila Edith Best, with a doctorate in education from UNC Chapel Hill, has circled the world over 20 times, delivering workshops and one-on-one coaching. She has helped hundreds of people in dozens of countries find meaningful success in careers that resonate with their own values and nature. Dr. Best surveyed nearly 400 people on 6 countries for her in-depth research that explored the relationship between overall job satisfaction and various aspects of work, including spiritual faith and practice. She worked as a teacher and school principal for 27 years. Dr. Ruchira S. Datta has a doctorate from UC Berkeley in math focused on game theory, the theory of strategic interaction, which plays an important role in business and negotiation. Ruchira has worked in industry, academia, government, and non-profit, from 12-person companies to large multinational companies. Since 2011, Dr. Datta's consulting business has helped businesses with data science. As a teacher of the yoga of love and devotion since 2013 and a practitioner since childhood, Ruchira understands and can integrate spirituality and career. So in this, what follows will be referring to them by their spiritually given names of Urmila and Rukmini. And with that, we'll head straight into the interview. My quick take on the book is that it draws on Vedic insights to bring ideas on how modern society can have people working in careers that they find satisfaction and meaning, and where they're contributing value to society. And if everyone were doing that, society would actually be a better place, even though lots of us might think nobody would pay me to do what I feel like doing, or I might enjoy doing that, but is someone else going to value it? So with that said, maybe one of you wants to give a little bit of an introduction about the book, and then we can launch into some questions.
Well, we wrote this book for anyone to find out how they can work according to their nature, contribute to society, and have a fulfilling career through ancient wisdom brought into the modern time. That was a very brief introduction.
Nice. So there's lots of books already on the subject of, finding a career that works for you. What are they offering? Like, do you want to give a little bit of landscape of the wisdom that's already out there, and then how this one is unique?
Well, many other books either try to fit you for a role and figure out what kind of role you're fit for. So there's various books that try to find your perfect career. And they will emphasize that you may not be in the right career, so they will try to move you to a different one, so that the career fits you. And then there are other books that try to fit you to the place that you're already in, and give you techniques such as meditation or breathing exercises, or just taking a step back. Different advice like this about how to deal with your workplace that exists. So you're changing yourself, but you're not trying to change your workplace. And so one aspect of our book that is unique is that we are covering both aspects. That it is important that the workplace fit you, and there are certain ways of determining that you're actually in the wrong role altogether. However, there's also ways that you need to change yourself. There are practices that you need to do, or you may need to do, depending on what workplace you're in. And that can also help you to adjust to work. So both aspects of the worker and workplace fit are covered in our book.
Nice.
I think what's also special about our book is that we look at society as a whole and how an ideal society would work if people were in their right place and working in the right way. So we look at not just individuals, but what are sound economic perspectives to take? What would be sustainable prosperity for all? And a vision of a whole society. So I think that's a very special aspect of our book.
Yeah, that's an important point. I remember listening to, people like Robert Kiyosaki and, self-made billionaires who are like, oh, anyone can do it. Here's the formula. And I'm like, no, well, there's a bell curve here. Other people tried what you did and didn't succeed. And if everybody tried and put the same amount of effort and skill in as you did, still only a handful of them will see, because there's a bell curve. Only so many people can get ahead in business and own a hotel chain or whatever businesses they're saying you can get ahead in. But also, what annoys me about those How to Get Rich books is they ignore the fact that it's like different people have a different nature, and actually, no, not everyone can do what you did, because some people just have a completely different nature that's not suited to that type of work.
Yes, and sometimes people think they're being humble by saying, oh, if I can do it, then anyone can do it. But actually, it's not necessarily the case. And it's not acknowledging that there is diversity among different kinds of people. And so different people are suited to different kinds of work. Yes, that's a great point that you noticed. But
also often what they're not painting a picture of what would society look like if everybody tried to get ahead in business the way these people are, like who would clean the toilets, who would so many things if everybody's just trying to get to the top of the food chain in a business point perspective.
And that life actually needs to be good also for the people who clean the toilets.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Maybe we could talk about that now. I mean, I think modern economy is really messed up in that you could do an honest job that's needed in society and struggle to earn enough to pay the bills. And there's not much we can really do about that. But there's another side of that question of like, it's easy probably for anyone to look at a job and be like, like personally, like I work as an electrician at the moment, but I just can't stand painting. There's just something about the finishing work and the fact that you can ruin the carpet or, the brush strokes. But there's other people who enjoy painting, and like, it's easy to be like, how could anyone enjoy this job? Or, we gave a toilet cleaning example, but there's probably more extreme examples we can give. I do maintenance for a dementia care clinic, and there's people there. I've seen them with the face mask on in the sink. I think they're doing the laundry. Do you want to comment on that, one of you?
Well, there are people who enjoy jobs. I mean, some jobs shouldn't be done at all. There shouldn't be slaughterhouse workers, for example. But there are people who enjoy a variety of jobs that to us might not be enjoyable. And whether or not a job is enjoyable has to do with many factors besides the job itself. So like in the second part of the book, we really explore that. The first part, we explore matching your nature to your work. And then the second part, we really explore what are the sort of holistic components of your work and of life that can bring you deep satisfaction in the work that you do. And yeah, I mean, no one should be working, at least theoretically speaking, nobody should be working in a job where they're feeling, I don't like what I'm doing, and I'm not really getting the kinds of prosperity that enrich me.
I guess one aspect there is someone could be working in a job that is according to their nature, but they're doing it in a society that doesn't appreciate them for doing it. And that makes it really unfulfilling, right?
Definitely.
There's also the aspect that the workplace can be run not according to the principles of that nature. So we give some examples of that in our book.
Yeah, that you might be suited to work in finance and you might be working in the position where you're suited, but that the workplace culture is out of harmony with the nature of the work. So you could be out of harmony with the nature of the work you're doing, or you could be in harmony with the nature of the work that you're doing, but the people around you are not. They're working according to a different cultural norm. Would that be a way to say it?
So Urmila, if you remember the example that I was speaking of, like yes. what exactly would we say was out of harmony? It was not allowing the person to exercise their nature of maximizing resources and independent thinking.
Yeah, well, there's one, I don't know if I'm thinking exactly what you're thinking, but I know directly of a person who was a financial manager for a company and was told, okay, you've got to come in 9 to 5. And even if you finish your work by 1, you still have to work until 5. And you don't have to do anything, but you have to be here. And the person had previous experience as a company CEO, and would often go to the leaders and say, I have this idea how we could become more profitable, we could manage the money better. And they'd say, no, stick to your role. And that's it. And eventually he was very frustrated and moved on to something else. So in a different company with a different culture, he could have actually helped that company become far more profitable and more financially efficient. But the culture was treating him as if he was just, say, adding up numbers instead of actually being a full financial manager.
Might be a good time to go into the 4 different natures and explain what they are.
Well, there's the field of ideas, the field of government, the field of resources, and the field of artistry. So the field of artistry supplies all of the pleasures in society. Basically, without artistry, society would be dry and there wouldn't be anything enjoyable in life. All the beauty and the function in society, all the roles of support, they're the ones who make everything work.
Everything runs well and smoothly thanks to the field of artistry.
Yes.
And we may think of artistry, it has the word artist in it, but it's not just artists. So if I recall correctly, we sort of defined artistry as grace and efficacy in motion and emotion. So that can be applied across a wide range of careers. And we also mentioned, so some people may not see themselves as, some people in this field may not see themselves as having artistry. And we wrote in the book, and this was a long time ago, this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we wrote that if you think that there's no artistry in what you do, then it is likely that very soon your job will be done by a robot. So at that time we were saying to find the artistry in what you do. Of course now, even artists, that seems to be almost the first thing that people are trying to replace with robots.
Oh yeah, that funny tweet about how robots doing all the painting and poetry writing while we do the hard jobs is not the future I imagined.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. And then the people who are suited, so that's the nature of the field itself. And then if we're looking at the nature of the people in the field, what really satisfies them is serving a customer, serving a client. I think what you mentioned about people not being appreciated for their work especially applies to work in this field. That people in this field of artistry they're not just working for money. I mean, they want to be compensated fairly and with dignity for their goods or services, but their satisfaction that they're looking for is that I have made this or cleaned this or created this or helped with this so that somebody is happy, so that somebody is pleased with it. And it's that mood of someone is appreciating how I've made the world more beautiful, how I've made the world more functional.
There's also satisfaction in craft itself.
Yes.
Craftsmanship.
And there's a deep honesty to this field. I mean, I usually give a very simple example that if you go into a shop that sells plumbing pipe, So you don't think that the price they're selling the pipe for is the price they paid for it. You know that there's a difference, that they're covering all their various expenses and they're making a profit, etc. But when you hire a plumber, the plumber lists the cost of the pipe that they paid, and then they list separately their labor charges. And you're expecting that kind of honesty from a plumber.
That's not really how the businesses operate these days, though. Usually, like I think with plumbing pipe, it's typically 100% markup.
But it's not supposed to be like that in this field.
But I think one of the reasons it's like that actually is the costs of running a trade business are so high. And if you just tell them we're charging you $150 an hour, they'd call someone else. But if you can hide your prices somewhere, because you're competing in a marketplace, and if you don't charge the way other people charge, they're just going to call the other guy, and you just have to hide the prices. Otherwise, you just won't get jobs. So that the market kind of forces it on them.
That's really a shame. That means that the mentality of another field has entered that field.
Yeah.
That's what's happened. And that's a very common situation in modern society. But the Dharma of that field, what really gives a person satisfaction working in that field is I have honestly represented my goods and or services, and I've been compensated fairly, and I've been appreciated. I mean, one thing that I've really noticed is that if all you do with workers in that field is to pay them, they're not going to be that happy. They're looking for that customer or client satisfaction. That's their pleasure, and it's basically a satisfied field. It's not a field where people are naturally very ambitious. So if people working in the temperament for working in this field is that if I have a decent place to live and good food to eat and nice clothes to wear and people who love me, and I can hone my craft to some area of expertise and I'm treated with dignity, then they're satisfied.
So one thing that happens in many corporations is that so people who are very good at the craft part, if they want to advance in their careers over the course of their careers, they're forced into management. Sometimes there isn't actually a track for them to just advance in seniority and, just gradually get better compensation due to their level of experience and their expertise in their craft. And then they're forced into management, whether or not that's actually something that is suited to their temperament. There was something called the Peter Principle, which is that everyone is promoted to their point of their incompetence. And that's sort of a side effect of this, that the idea that if someone is ambitious, then their ambition must lie in being in charge of other people. Now, being in charge of other people is not necessarily to do with a field. That's sort of a different division. But if someone who doesn't want to be in charge of other people is sort of, has to be because that's the way the line of promotion goes, then they can be instrumental in creating a workplace that is not suitable for the people under them. And that can lead to greater dissatisfaction for a larger number of people. Yeah, right. I've seen that happen lots, actually. I worked at one point for a company that fixes dental equipment, and the New Zealand industry for repairing dental equipment is more extreme than other places because it's too small of an economy to have specialists for a particular brand. So they fix everything dentists use of any brand. So the amount of expertise required for those technicians is on a whole nother scale than what you typically have in America, where you just worked for Sirona and worked on Sirona equipment. And the people that ran that business, it was like they owned shares, and if you worked there long enough, you could buy shares and stuff like that. They were just been in the company for a long time, and they were in management, and they weren't actually very good managers. They were kind of horrible to work under, and I just figured it's because what that filtered for is people who are just really good at fixing dental equipment but not good at managing.
But I think this might get us into another question of where they cross over, because it's like, well, a trade business should be run on the principles of the field of arts, but then there's got to be somebody to quote the jobs and make sure that the finances work, and somebody's got to manage the people. And is that all done by people who are in the nature of arts, or do they get contractors in to manage their accounts? So how does that work?
One can have an accountant. So there's this concept of the difference between a lifestyle business and a business that is seeking to expand and grow. And in a lot of the advice that business people get, at least in the US, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, it's sort of expected that everybody should want to grow. And a lot of the advice, although of course there are many people who really just want lifestyle businesses, but a lot of the business advice is about grow, grow, grow. So that's a key difference. That and they basically say that if you're not growing, then you're going to decline. There's no alternative. So that's one of the key differences, is that someone who is in the field of artistry, they're happy with a lifestyle business which supports their own craft and their own livelihood, and isn't necessarily then going to expand into many, many people under them and many chains, and even a franchise or so forth. A franchisee might be in the field of artistry. That's one. So then the headquarters might be in the field of resources, which we haven't introduced yet.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, I don't think so. But yeah, I mean, you can have somebody who's a leader or a manager who's also in artistry.
Yes.
But yeah, like Rukmini was saying, what they're going to be interested in running is something that's smaller, and they're not going to have this expansive idea. They're not going to be profit-minded. They're going to be quality-minded and service-minded, so that people, again, are compensated fairly and the craft is preserved, whatever the craft is. Then you also have, a big business that's employing a lot of plumbers or whatever, then that's going to be run by someone in a different field.
Right.
Who's then employing people in the field of artistry. So you have this difference. You have those who are leaders in the field of artistry who are employing others. Maybe they employ 3 others. And then you have people who are in another field, in the field of resources, which we haven't talked about yet, who are employing people in the field of artistry.
Would that situation naturally create a mix-up of the principles of how the business is run, or can it be done in a way that works?
Which situation?
I mean, like, I guess, I know a couple of people who are like really good at their craft. One-man band, that's the phrase in New Zealand. They got a van, a couple of tools, no sign writing, no website, and people just call them because they know this guy's honest, he does a good job, and his prices are fair. And like they've basically got unlimited work. They have no interest in hiring staff. And that works because they've got no business overheads. As soon as they had business overheads, then they have to put their prices up and, all sorts of carry on. And then maybe just the honesty of their reputation. As soon as you put your prices up, you can't just ride on that reputation. You actually have to do marketing and website and Google reviews and think about the business side of things. But if you can have none of those overheads and just charge the lower price, and you can just be the guy that if they can't get you, they'll still try next time because they know you're cheaper, honest, and do a better job.
They could, I don't know the specifics, but one could delegate some of those aspects like to an accountant or a marketing consultant and so forth, and still have one's own business.
Oh, yeah.
As a lifestyle business. I
actually know a devotee electrician who does that. He's just works on the tools and he's got a company that he pays to do his invoicing. He's like, I make more money going out and doing jobs than sitting in front of a computer invoicing, so I just pay them to do it. He's also not interested in growing and scaling. So yeah, there are ways to do it, but a typical thing as a trade business will be 5 or 6 vans on the road and somebody's marketing and cold calling and
business. Yeah, well then it's run by someone in another field.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to introduce the next field?
Okay, well we could talk next about resources. So that's an expansive field. And that field supplies all the raw materials for food and construction, clothing, medicine. Often they're converting natural resources in some way. They're working on the land and producing fibers and, milk and grains and vegetables or something like that, or metals. And they're basically supplying the needs of human society. Some of them are working directly with money. So the bankers, the investors, and so forth. And the Vedic literature, the Bhagavad Purana, describes that these people are always thirsty. They're expansive people. They think, let's feed the world, let's clothe the world, let's make the world prosperous. And they understand the flow of resources, and they understand how to make money when things are going up and how to make money when things are going down, and how to respond to different changes in the market. They tend to be the main people who are employers. I mean, there are employers in all four fields, but they tend to be the main employers, to pay the majority of the tax base, to pay the majority of charity. And the people in that field are really committed to generating wealth for society. Now, in order to do that, they have a mood of having sustainable regenerative wealth, if they're actually following the Dharma of this field. And for that reason, they need to be profit-minded. Just like you have to save some of the seeds from a harvest to plant the next year. And people outside this field can misunderstand this as greediness, but it's not. They are seeing that unless I have some stock and I'm taking care of myself and I'm keeping everything going, there's not going to be anything for the future. And this field is not known for the kind of honesty that you find in the field of artistry. So like, you don't expect advertisements to be honest, and you don't expect, when you go into a business, you expect that they're making a profit on their goods and so forth. Some other thoughts, Rukmini, on this field?
Yes, they're in tune with cycles. So that's how they're able to make money when things are going down and things are going up, and they will know, or they'll have their ears perk up, their senses. They'll know sort of ahead of time. They'll be watching. Oh, well, things are going this way, so I better shift what I'm doing. They're also able to take risks, but they're educated risks. They're prudent risks, if I may. So they're not just shall we say gambling, but they're prudent risks. So, for instance, the merchants who would send ships between places, they would be taking a risk because something could happen to the ship due to the weather, and all their goods could be lost. So that's a kind of a risk that one has to take to be in that business. But then that allows one to get into different markets that are in distant places. So that's an example. So that's one difference with the field of artistry. Many people in the field of artistry are a bit more risk averse. Although any specific characteristic there may be, it's a correlation, not necessarily definitive or dispositive. But yes, that's one of the characteristics, is being in tune with cycles and being able to take risks in a controlled and prudent way.
The thing that I find hard to understand about these people is that they could get to the stage in a business where they sell at exit and could have enough money to live the rest of their life without ever working, and then they'll just go start another business and get up with the sun every day to go earn more money.
Yes, exactly, because it's an expansive, ever thirsty field. Two of the fields are naturally satisfied fields, and two of the fields are expansive fields. And yes, that exact mentality, someone I know who's in this field and who said to me, okay, now we just sold our business and I could retire at age 30. And I'm like, great. And he says, but I don't want to retire at age 30. I want to keep working. And, I was just like, what? Huh? But yeah, that's the because they feel that it's their dharma to provide for society, not just to provide for themselves and have basic comforts. In the field of artistry, if you've got basic comforts of life and you can work your craft and make society beautiful, you're not really pushed to do more than that. It's enough for you. But in resources, it's not like that.
Yeah, I guess the parallel to their arts would be the craftsmen who, like, say they got enough money where they didn't have to work, or they could, like, you could just go give this career, work for 5 years, and then you could retire. They'd be like, no, I'm just happy making my crafts. People enjoy my crafts. I get enough money from what I'm doing at the moment. I've got no interest in doing that.
Exactly. But we need people in the field of resources to have that mentality. We don't want them just to grow enough food for their family and be happy. They're growing the food for society.
So we should preface that when we describe the field, we are describing the ideal of the field. So it is possible so if you see actual people and you say, and we mentioned in our book that you may say, oh, the people I know who are in this field, they act just the opposite of what you're saying. But that may be because they're not acting according to the ideal of the field. They have the temperament for that field, but something has gone awry, and what those somethings can be, that's what we describe in the course of our book. So, for instance, someone can be in the field of resources and they're expanding, but they're expanding just to keep some metric going up, and the metric may not actually have to do with the prosperity of society. That's something, as we mentioned before, that we talk about later in our book, in the later part.
Yeah, I think there was an extreme example of a prison system that was trying to have a quota of prisons so they could make their money or something.
Well, there you're looking at crossing fields. There you're looking at people who have a resources mentality working in the field of government. And what I usually tell people is you've got two main problems. One is you're working in the wrong field, and the other is you're working in the right field, but you're doing it wrongly. So, like, the first part of our book is, what's your prosperity type, which we haven't talked about on this podcast, but what's your prosperity type and what's your field? Be in the right place. And then the second part of our book is how to be in the right place rightly, as well as, don't be in the wrong place. So be in the right place and be in the right place rightly. We have a section on, like, cherishing your field, cherishing your prosperity type, making sure your work is honest, making sure your work is of value. And that's true in all of the fields, although how it manifests in each field is going to be somewhat different according to the nature of that field.
I don't know if you want to sketch that out briefly or move on to talking about the next field.
Well, let's move on to the next field first. Rukmini, you want to talk about government?
I think it's simpler if you continue, since it's more parallel that way.
Okay. Although it's so nice to also hear from you. Rukmini and I, when we were actually writing the book, we were meeting almost every day and talking about these things, and I miss that.
Oh, the book was a long time coming. I heard about it years ago. I was thinking, I can't wait for this book.
Yeah. Well, you and us both. We were all of that. It was one of those like elephants are pregnant for 2 years kind of thing. One of those kind of things. So the field of government is organizing society. That as soon as you have more than a small society, you need some sort of organization, some sort of law, protection from internal and external threats. You need somebody to manage the society. So although we call it the field of government, it does not just apply to political governments. It also applies to, ironically, things called non-government organizations that do government work, or to things like NATO and Interpol and the UN that do government type work. And it can apply on a really small scale to, say, an apartment owner who rents it out. So the income can be from, like, taxes and fees and fines, or the income can be from charity, which traditionally wasn't the case, but it's the case in modern society, or the income can be from rent. And the people in this field, their inspiration is justice, honor, law, morals, ethics. like the field of resources, it's an expansive field. They want to protect and care for more people, bigger and better. And like the field of resources, it's also a field where people are diplomatic rather than straightforward honesty, like you would find in artistry. But like artistry, it's a field where they're directly caring for people. But in artistry, you're caring for people like an assistant, and in government, you're caring for people more like a parent. And this is also, Rukmini was talking about how in resources that people will take calculated, educated risks. And that's even more so true in government. So if you take, say, a firefighter who, in my mind, epitomizes a worker in this field, they're going to put on their equipment, but they're running into the fire. Everybody else runs out and they run into the fire. There's criminals shooting it out in a building, and they're going to run into the building. So this is the basic mentality of this field.
So here's another example where we're describing the ideal, and then people think, oh, that's different than what I experience. So someone opened our book, someone the other day I was showing our book, he opened it to that place where we start to describe the field of government and how they want to protect other people and they want to run into danger. And he said, oh no, they're not like that at all. People take a government job because it is easy, it is low risk, and they don't need to worry. There's a lot of job security. That's why they take a government job.
Yeah, right.
So that also be, Rukmini, some people in the field of artistry who are taking a job technically in government, but where they're assistants rather than actually doing work in the field of government?
Yes, we did talk about, and we even talked about bureaucrats specifically. Do you want to expand on bureaucracy?
Yeah.
Well, I think what you're bringing up is that you want some bureaucrats in government. You want some people who are, making sure that rules are followed and paperwork is done and everything is properly filed and so forth. But those are people who are in the field of artistry assisting government. And if you have people who have an artistry mentality doing actual government work, then they're going to make the government itself a bureaucracy, which will then not be able to respond adequately to people's needs.
Now, because the field of artistry is large, the number of people in a particular government, depending on how complex the society is and how complex the government is, the number of people who are actually in the field of artistry and should be in the field of artistry may be outnumbering the people who are in the field of government as we describe it.
Yes, that's most likely true. I mean, we have in our book a few examples, some with illustrations, 2 or 3, I think, where we show how, in one place, in one school or in one law practice, there's people in all 4 fields that are cooperating together. So it's not that in any government building or any government office that everyone in that building is working in the field of government. That is not the correct understanding.
Yes.
I find the idea that property is in the field of government interesting. I think of the ideal, I like to think of agrarian societies when I'm talking about how society should be structured ideally, because it's just such simple examples. The person in resources, if whoever can grow the best potatoes, they get ahead, they hire more people, they get more field because they're getting the sales and so on. And that's good if you're growing the best potatoes because you're delivering something people need and you're not cutting. It's not like selling the most cigarettes. You're not killing people, right? But so with the field of government, I think of it like, the farmers grow the grains, the king collects the taxes, and they store up a wealth of grains. And then if there's a famine for some reason, they will pour all their wealth away to feed the people and go down to
Correct.
zero.
Yes, but the farmers shouldn't do that. The government should do that, but not the farmers.
Yeah. Now, how many people in government are like that is another question, but that's again the ideal.
That's you've hit on what is the Dharma of the field of government and how it differs from one of the ways that it differs from the field of resources. So when we're talking about landlords, we're not talking about land ownership for agriculture. We're talking about you're renting out the land.
Because typically, I think it's done with a resources mentality of, if I buy this and then I can flip it and then I get these and I rent them out and I'll make this much profit and so on. And it's just figuring out how to squeeze. That's a different thing. But we're talking about if you're owning property that you're renting out and you're providing your renters, you're making sure your renters have, a place to park and they have water and they have electricity, they have what they need. On a very small scale, you're acting like a government, and therefore it's that mentality. Well, but I really like what you said. The government stocks things and then redistributes those things. And if there's need, they redistribute everything. I mean, this is described in several cases in the Bhagavad Purana, and empty the storehouse, whereas the people in the field of resources are not supposed to do that. And if they did, it would be bad, because then what are they going to plant next year?
Exactly.
I think so. This was in the. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, you go.
An example was the British East India Company, which was merchants, as we described, merchants are in the field of resources. So at one point, they took over the governorship of Bengal. And this worked well for the first few years. So they had a lot of farmers who were growing rice. That's what grows in Bengal. And they decided that to convert some of them to growing a cash crop, indigo, which they could then trade, that would work very well for their merchant fleet. They could even export that and get lots of money for that. And so that was working, and they were collecting taxes from those rice growers. The taxes was in the amount of rice. But then a famine hit in 1776. That's at least the way the famine is remembered in Bengali is 1776. I think it was actually for a few different years. And then instead of, so what we just described, what someone in the field of government is supposed to do is when there's a famine, then they have been storing all this grain and they should start redistributing the grain that they had stored up for this eventuality. So what the British East India Company did instead was, this tax rate that we put is not giving us the amount of grain that we expected because it's a smaller total amount of grain that is being grown in Bengal. So we better raise the tax rate so that we'll get the same amount that we were supposed to get. And so yes, and the amount of grain was down both because of the famine and also because there was no resiliency because they had switched various farmers to growing indigo. So both the crop failure and the total number of rice farmers being smaller. So then there was a huge decline in the population. It said that perhaps 25% of the people of Bengal perished in that famine, which was, it could have been up to 10 million people. It's hard to say because this was not a time of good record keeping, and many places that had been cultivated and had been part of civilization, they reverted to the jungle because so many people died.
Wow, that's extreme. And related to that type of famine, I don't know if it was the same famine, but I think there was an example given by Thomas Sowell of a case in India where either there was price fixing, there was not price fixing, but there's been cases where there was famine and there was price fixing, and it's like, why would I drive into that famine-stricken place to sell my rice when I can sell it for the same price here? Because when you don't have price fixing, the people in the field of resources will be like, hey, I can get a higher price if I go there, and they'll go all over the country to pick up rice and take it to the famine place where people are starving because the price is able to fluctuate up in order to meet the demand. Or in order to create a supply for the demand that's there.
I mean, I find it very interesting that, Rukmini is giving an example where people with the mentality of resources were doing government type work, and therefore people starved. And you have the same situation happen for different reasons when people with the mentality of government do resources type work. It's quite interesting.
My wet takeaway from the price fixing thing is the government shouldn't try to pretend that they're God. Like, you don't know everything about all these features of like supply and demand and everything and how much is needed for resources and different things. So just don't fix the prices. Let the market do that. Leave it to the hand of the, the invisible hand of the market, or, it's a divine order to set that up, and just don't think you know more than you know. Otherwise, you probably mess things up. I don't know if that ties into
Yes. So price fixing is one thing, and price controls are a different thing. But yes, those are sort of details that we don't get into that level of detail in our book.
Yeah, I'm kind of bringing economics in, but it just reminded me of how someone in the field of resources, if they're given the right incentives, can actually do important things. And if those incentives are taken away, they just won't do it. I guess that would be how it ties in. I don't know how it plays out with the government people.
Right. But then there's another issue, which is that various things are sometimes that's applied in various situations where actually that thing itself should not be done by someone in the field of resources in the first place. So we just described like renting out property,
drugs.
No. It's we're not. I'm not talking about criminality. I'm talking about like the provision of. So we're talking about renting out property that we just described is in the field of government. Then there's also health, education. Those are all provided by different fields.
Yeah, so you want pharmaceuticals done by someone with a resources mentality. How can I get as many people as possible on antidepressants? Probably not the greatest thing, right?
Right, exactly.
Right. We just had, it's still playing out. There's this case of the opioid epidemic, which was there was this one family that actually basically cashed out on getting a lot of opioids prescribed, and even though it was known for a long time that opioids, they're related to the name you get from the name, they're related to opium, heroin, and so forth. So it was known that they have the potential for addiction. And I don't recall the details. There was a recent book that went into it very well, but I haven't read that book yet. But they somehow got doctors to prescribe them by somehow saying that it somehow dismissing or somehow eliding the fact that they're addictive and that they can get people in a lot of trouble. So this is an epidemic in many places in America. So for instance, I live in the state of Ohio. Throughout the Midwest, there's many places where there's this epidemic of opioid addiction, and this one family had somehow, it's almost exactly what you said, that they somehow found a way to get around this idea that you shouldn't get people addicted to drugs.
So I guess
basically they're the legal drug dealers. It's Sackler family.
The medical system's probably a crossover of all of the fields, though. So like to get a pharmaceutical to market, there's a lot of business stuff you need to do to make that happen, and we need pharmaceuticals in the world, so somehow that has to happen. I think the way it's currently structured, I don't think is the best system. So maybe we can talk about that.
You need the field. In traditional medicine, you would definitely need the field of resources to grow and harvest what's being used as medicines, because originally medicines were plants. And you'd also need resources, the field of resources, if you're going to manufacture pharmaceuticals from plants. If you're going to be taking out the essential ingredients, or you're going to be synthesizing those ingredients. So you definitely need resources involved with that. And then, of course, you're going to need artistry to do a lot of the the technical work of harvesting and things of that nature. And then you need government to regulate, like government should regulate any of these things, to regulate the quality of it. And then you need people and ideas, which we haven't talked about yet, to be doing the research, and also then to be giving the medical care directly to people as part of education and part of, general care. And the people doing that work are not in resources. So you have all four fields are going to be involved in medicine in some way.
Yeah, I wonder with you'd think with well, I guess we'll explain the field of ideas in a minute, and I think would a GP be that category? Like, you go into this person for advice, and the most yes. important thing you need from them is them to be honest, not try to make a money, not be bought, and really, really understand the things they're talking about. And with that, I think if you had someone who was, I guess another factor, which, you talk about the shades of ego in the book a fair bit, because, you could have somebody who's working according to their nature, but they're not working according to the right motivations, so that their best is not brought out of them. So, because I think of someone in the field of ideas as someone who's not easily bought. Like one example I think of as the classic person in the field of ideas is Nikola Tesla. He had no interest in making money off of anything. He just wanted to improve society. He just wanted to get these ideas out there and develop this technology. And he died penniless, and bunch of shrewd businessmen stole a lot of his ideas and made lots of money of them. And they wanted to, he wanted to make free power, and they wanted to meter the power and stuff like that. And Nikola Tesla's not somebody you could give him but if I give you more money, then will you let me sell your technology? You couldn't do that with him. And maybe a GP who's getting, their tank full in the right way, because society's appreciating what they're doing, or they're able to do what they want to do in a way that they're given the freedom, so they feel that satisfaction. Maybe they wouldn't be able to be bought.
So yeah, the field of ideas, like the field of artistry, is this field of satisfaction. It's not an expansive field. And unlike the field of artistry, though, instead of being satisfied with, nice house, nice food, and favorable family, and the craft and the dignity of being paid well, people in the field of ideas are satisfied with their internal mental and intellectual work. And this is the field that provides the vision for society, the guidance for society, the wisdom for society. It's the most abstract field. And a lot of what the field of ideas provides is not understood as valuable by people in the other fields. They'll look at it and say, why are you spending time and energy and money on it? It's a lot of it just seems very abstract and very theoretical to many people. In traditional society, people in the field of ideas were generally supported through charity. Either charity given by the government or charity given by people in general, because, they had very little interest in working for money. And what they were providing was often so abstract that people couldn't see, well, what practical value are you giving? But they're giving the vision. And the people who work in that field are dedicated to truth and wisdom. It's interesting, the comparison between the honesty in artistry and the honesty in this straightforward honesty of ideas. In ideas, you're going to tell people, hey, this is the way it is. And they're like, I don't like that. That's not what I want to hear. Whereas in artistry, you're saying, okay, we're going to make the kind of bridal gown that you want. The designer may think, gosh, I'd rather put you in something else. But they're hitting it, they're aiming it toward the customer. And the people in this field, they're satisfied. They tend to be detached from life. If you can think about the mood of someone who's commenting on a sports game without playing it. So that's kind of the mood of ideas. They're observing life, they're commenting on life, they're guiding life, but they often feel themselves kind of above the fray of life. Now, some people in ideas are working on minutia of knowledge and research. Some are working on broad pictures, and some of them many of them are teachers, but some of them are involved in meditation. And I have to pause for a minute because there's someone bringing my lunch that I have to deal with. I'll be back.
Do you want to comment a little bit about the field of ideas?
So they can be involved with other fields in giving advice, there is a tendency in the field of ideas to prefer that someone else make the decisions with their advice. Now, this is not 100% of the time, but this is a tendency, is to give the advice and leave the decision up to the person in that field who is acting. So, for instance, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, he gives all this wisdom to Arjuna, and of course, Krishna is in all four fields. This is just an example of. Then he says, "Now I have told you everything. Now you decide what to do, and do whatever you wish." So that's a typical thing that an advisor would do. And so you may find people in the field of ideas advising people in any of the other three fields in government or resources or artistry. And so then, because they're working in that, they may appear to be in government, resources, or artistry because, for instance, they're perhaps employed by the government. So in ancient times, you might have the people advising the king, the counselors. Those would be people in the field of ideas.
I find myself doing that with staff, like the apprentice. I once he gets to a certain level, train him and then just tell him, explain everything to him and then let him decide. But I figure that's because he'll learn faster if I throw him in the deep end a bit and he has to figure things out for himself.
Mm-hmm. And it does take a certain amount, at least a little bit of detachment to be able to do that. So yes, knowledge and detachment are some of the things that this field generates for society. Although that brings us to another aspect that we also discussed in the book, the prosperity types.
So it seems like a teacher would be in the field of ideas. Urmila was mentioning to me that not always. What would the cases be where a teacher is not in the field of ideas?
So there's a difference between teaching and training. And so there's aspects where someone is just teaching a particular skill, for instance, and they're in the field and they're just teaching that skill to the other people who are in that same field. And they may be teaching mostly by showing, by just demonstrating, by example. So in each field, someone demonstrates by example to their juniors. That is a kind of teaching, but it's not necessarily that they're in the field of ideas. So for instance, the master pipe fitter will be teaching their apprentice pipe fitters how to fit pipe.
Right.
And
I can imagine a case with someone in the field of ideas were teaching and it was just like, here's one way you can do it, but you make up your own mind. And, if it was gas fitting, it's like, no, you have to do it in this particular way. Otherwise the gas will leak. I don't know. Can you imagine a crossover like that? Or, well, I guess there's a thing where someone in the field of ideas could do that role, but just not be happy doing it. Is that where it would come out?
Well, so it depends. So for instance, there's a book called Shop Class is Soulcraft by a person who is a professor, and then he really is interested in basically in the field of artistry, and he's telling other people how wonderful is the field of artistry. Yet he's not himself making his living by making things for other people. He's actually making his living by teaching people in the field of artistry. So I haven't read the entire book, but I believe that he is actually in the field of ideas, but he has a great affinity for the field of artistry, which is why that's whom he likes to teach. He teaches them about artistry. And if you remember in the Mahabharata, that Dronacharya is a person in the field of ideas, and he teaches the young princes the art of archery and the arts of weaponry, military arts. He has this affinity for these particular arts, which are part of the field of government, although he himself is in the field of ideas.
So it sounds like, like I'm in the electrical industry, so I know it pretty in depth. So an example of a teacher who's in the field of arts teaching might be like, here's how you make a switchboard beautiful. Here's how you run the wires down and twist them and everything and make it look immaculate at the end. And at the end of it, you put a cover over it. No one's going to see it. Whereas someone in the field of ideas will be like, here's all the things you as an electrician need to understand in order to go out there and do your job and make decisions on a day-to-day basis based on this information.
Yes, I don't know how much teaching in the field of ideas is. I'm not very familiar with the field of an electrician. I am a little bit familiar with electrical engineering. I majored in it for 2 quarters. And so there were professors of electrical engineering who were in the field of ideas, even though they were teaching people who were going to be electrical engineers who were in the field of artistry. And so there was a lot of theory that they were developing, and they would even be inventing and researching new theory, but they weren't doing projects for specific clients generally. They might even do that if they had like students who were doing some kind of apprentice work. They might be helping them to do projects for clients, but their main field was the theory and the ideas behind the transmission of electricity and the creation of electrical systems.
I really like that you're making that distinction. One of the points that I make to people is that in any work, there's 3 parts. There's the information you need to do the job. There's the skills or the crafts you need to do the job. And then there's the Dharma, or the values and the big picture. So, it's also mentioned in the Bhagavad Purana that Arjuna, who was in the field of government, taught secrets of weaponry to Satyaki, also in the field of government. So you do have teachers within each of the fields. You're going to have someone who's in the field, who's an electrician in the field of artistry, teaching other electricians in the field of artistry the information and the craft. But once you have someone teaching the Dharma, then you're going to the field of ideas. And I really like what Rumini said about, researching the theory of electrical engineering.
Yeah, the researching one's interesting.
Looking at the whole science of it. And that's a different perspective. Dronacharya was expert in the whole science of weaponry, not just how to, aim your arrow and, but he had a whole understanding of how they worked on both a gross and a subtle level. So I tell people, if someone's just teaching you how to change your tires or how to bake a cake, that's not an ideas. Just teaching you some simple skill. And that can be done, again, anybody in any of the fields can be teaching or guiding others in just simply the information and the craft of that field. But people who are also Arjuna, although he taught Satyaki, he was not a full-time teacher. He was a ruler. And it was something, as part of being a ruler, he imparted some of his skills to his subordinates. Whereas not everyone in the field of ideas by any means is a full-time teacher, but people where teaching is their livelihood and where they're looking at the greater values in Dharma, that work is in the field.
I find the research point interesting. I once asked what the difference was between college and university, and someone told me universities do research, colleges just teach. And I guess it's not so related, but I find it an interesting distinction. And so someone in the field of arts who's teaching trade skills, they might just, quote the book and tell you how to do the job, whereas somebody in the field of ideas who's treating a trade, they might be like, well, why do we do it this way? Maybe there's another way. Like, what's the reason behind all this stuff anyway? And actually just be interested in understanding things, even if it's like at the end of the day, you're still going to turn the screwdriver the same way you would before you thought about all that stuff. But it was interesting to think about, and who knows, there might be some practical change that comes, but that's irrelevant if it comes or not.
Well, there might be people in the field of artistry. I mean, there's a lot of creativity in the field of artistry. So they might not be doing just what's in the book or what was previously done, but it might be coming from their experience of that particular craft. And so then they may have developed a technique themselves. But it's very hands-on. It's very hands-on and very applied.
I suppose one thing we could move on discussing now we've listed them all is how people can be happy or unhappy depending whether they're well situated in their career.
Well, I mean, we're looking at several things. First of all, if you're in some of the symptoms of being in the right field is that your work will energize you. If you're in the right field in the right way, your work will be energizing you. You're going to experience a lot or all of what's described as a state of flow. And if you're in the wrong field or in the right field in the wrong way, you're going to feel the opposite. You're going to feel depleted or exhausted or frustrated. You may procrastinate a lot. And if you're in the right field in the right way, there's going to be an integrity between the work you're doing and your mental state that doesn't exist when you're doing other people's work. When you're working in the wrong field, then your mind is going to look at the work in a negative way. There's going to be some criticism of what you're doing that's related to which wrong field you're in. And when you're working in the right field in the right way, you naturally have a sense of detachment from the results of your work. The work itself is very satisfying. But I think you're also talking about the 6 types of prosperity in work.
Yeah, it's probably a good time to get into that.
Okay, Rukmini, would you like to introduce that?
Yes, so we describe these by their Sanskrit names. So we first say, why do people work? And you might think that's obvious. Well, you work to make money. And yes, people do work to make money. They work to make cash. However, there's people who make a lot of cash and yet they're still unhappy. That's what in the United States we have a tabloid called the National Enquirer. There are these little newspapers at the checkout stands where the main source of entertainment is how people who have a lot of money are not happy. That's one of the main things that people want to read about. And on the other hand, there might be people who actually have very little money and yet they know how to live and they have an intrinsic joy. So it's not necessarily money that directly makes people happy, although it is the case that having money below subsistence level can make you unhappy. But once you have enough money to subsist, to actually physically meet your very basic needs, then what actually makes you happy? There are different kinds of richness. So money itself falls into a category called Aishwarya, so sometimes that's translated as wealth or richness directly, but it also has to do with control, with the power to do what you want. So that's one kind of richness. But then there's other kinds, such as yasha, which is righteous fame. So that comes from community, good reputation, from having done good deeds. Then there is Shri, or beauty. Beauty is, again, this is the reason why we use the Sanskrit terms, is that they don't completely capture what what any of these is. Shri is a kind of a splendid radiance. And so for instance, if you think of a person who has Shri, it's not necessarily because they had good genes and good bone structure, although that may help, but it actually means that they have a kind of a glowing beauty from within. It's a generous kind of beauty. And then there is jnana, or knowledge, and there is vairagya, or detachment, and detachment leads to autonomy and freedom. And finally, there is virya, which is health, strength, and it's related to the word virility. In fact, it's the cognate. They're the same root, the Latin vir and the Sanskrit vir. So these are 6 kinds of richness, and we can think of that. Generally, we may think, okay, well, you go to work and you make money, and then you use it to buy whatever you want. So suppose you want knowledge, then you take the money and you use it to buy books and courses and so forth. Or suppose you want health, and you use the money to buy things that you use for your health, or to buy a gym membership, or to buy a kayak so you can go kayaking and so forth and do your healthy activities. However, if the work itself generates that kind of richness for you, then that makes the work itself more satisfying to you. And you can think of, if you've ever traveled to a foreign country and you exchange, if you exchange New Zealand dollars for US dollars, and then you take those very same US dollars that you just got and you exchange them back to New Zealand dollars, then you're going to have less New Zealand dollars than you started with. There's always a loss when you transfer between one currency and another. And similarly, when you transfer between these different kinds of richness, you don't exactly get as much as you put, and some things just don't translate. There's always a bit of a loss. So it's actually better if you're continually, while you're working, you're actually directly getting the kind of richness and that you like to experience. Then that really helps make your job itself satisfying.
I've got a quick comment or question before we talk about which ones will go where. But when I was 19, someone told me you can either work with your hands and then your mind's free, or you can work with your mind and then you don't have it free to ponder other things, which it's probably influenced my trajectory a little bit. I've thought about it a lot. So having a day job where I can listen to whatever I want all day, lectures, audiobooks and so on. Whereas if I had a job at a uni teaching some subject, or researching some subject that I didn't particularly find interesting, then I wouldn't have my mind free to think about all the philosophy stuff that I do.
Well, the idea is that if you're interested in Gyan, that you have a job that gives you not only Gyan, but also the types of Gyan that interest you.
Right.
That it's not. Yeah, if you're a person who's one of your main sources of prosperity is Gyan, you're not really going to be happy spending the bulk of your time just doing physical work that's not in and of itself filling you with Gyan. And where you're trying to get it another way by, listening to things on headphones. You'd be much more satisfied having work that was enriching you with Gyan directly. And Aishwarya also deals with, it's related to the word Ishwar, controller, to having positional leadership. So some of us really thrive. I mean, I met this one woman in Europe who has 50,000 people that she's engaging in business. Obviously not directly with each one of them, but she engages people who engage people who engage people. And that's one of her main sources of satisfaction. She's extremely successful in the field of resources. but she says she's not involved directly with marketing and selling and so forth, but rather with managing others. So what we see is if people aren't getting that directly from their work, they'll end up trying to manage others in another way. Or, I mean, Virya is a nice example. You know, some of us really like to get Virya as part of our work. That as a dancer, as a construction worker, or as somebody who's doing a lot of walking outside as part of the job. And others of us would find this annoying. You know, that we want our work itself to be more sedentary, and then we'd rather do our exercise at another time. And Shri can mean not only that we become more beautiful, but that our work fills us with beauty of some sort, that our work involves a lot of visual beauty or auditory beauty or the beauty of nature, or we have a kind of charismatic leadership, different from the positional leadership of Aishwarya as part of our work. And you find with each of these that some people really want them as part of their work and other people really don't. You know, some people really don't want to be in a position of leadership and power and control over other people at work at all. And for other people, it's what energizes them. And with Vairagya, you know, to have a flexible schedule, a minimalist lifestyle, to be able to travel a lot, to not be involved with emotional, social things at work. And again, for some people, this is of utmost importance in their work. And for other people, they really don't like this. They'd rather have security and regulation and have a lot of emotional interaction. And they want a life where they have more stuff around them. They're not really minimalists. So each of the prosperity types can be seen like this. And when I do a lot of counseling with people about work, one of the things that I ask them to do is to put these 6 prosperity types in order of what's most important to them. And everyone has a different order. And then after they put them in order, I'll do a little quiz with them. Like, let's say they've put Yasha above Virya. And I might say, okay, well, if you had work that could only give you one, either Yasha or Virya, what would you choose? And then when you do it like this with each pair, generally something moves. And people see what's actually most important to me in my work. What's nice about understanding the prosperity types in relationship to the fields is it can give you some guidance as to specificity of career within the fields, because each of the fields encompasses a broad range of careers. So you've got your basic values, your basic Dharma that's going to situate you in one of these 4 fields. And then your prosperity type gives you, okay, what specific kinds of work in this field would I want to do? Just like one thing you can do in the field of ideas is you can be a priest. You can be what we call a pujari. And there are many people in that situation who aren't really interested in Gyan. They're not really interested in research and study. And many of them are not interested in Vairagya either. They have a very fixed schedule. They may stay in one place their whole life. And they may have living situations that are very comfortable and not minimalist. And their main prosperity type may be Shri or Yasha. Maybe they have a community of other pujaris and priests that encourage and liven them. So we do look in our book at what kinds of prosperity types the fields produce for others. And so there is a natural linkage between certain prosperity types and certain fields in terms of what they give to others. But also looking at what will satisfy me is what do I want my career to give for me? And I have found over and over again that by discussing this with people, they get this kind of, inspiration. And people have come up to me after explaining this and saying, wow, I realize how important Yasha is in my work. Or I realize how I really don't want Yasha in my work. It's at the bottom of my list of something that I want. And it's important because often when we look at the types of careers we want, we're looking again at just the skills and the information. Are this the type of skills I want to be doing? And I pretty much always give this example of someone I know who used to work as a traveling musician, where as a traveling musician in a van, there was a lot of vairagya. As a musician with, creating the music, playing the music, the lights and sounds, and his wife was helping him as a dancer, there was a lot of Shri in his life. He'd have to move the equipment in and out of the van, so that involved some virya. And he was writing the lyrics, which tended to be philosophical lyrics, although you couldn't really hear them when you were listening to his concert. So that involves some gyan. And that now he gives tours in national parks in the United States. And he travels from one park to another. He's often out in nature, often for many days at a time, which is vairagya. Then he's hiking through the parks, giving tours and checking everything out, which is virya. He has to do a lot of research about the history of the park, the plants and animals, which is gyan. And then his work is involving the beauty of nature, which is Shri. So both being a traveling musician and a traveling park tour guide involve the same prosperity types, and they're both in the field of artistry. But superficially, they look like very different careers. So it allows us to find, when for whatever reason we shift careers, it allows us to find something that's in our same field and that gives us the prosperity types that nourish us, even if externally to someone, just looking technically at the information in the craft, it may look quite different.
That's another key differentiator of our book from others is we're not necessarily saying that a person, with some others, we're not necessarily saying that a person has to be in one specific career for their entire life to be satisfied. It's not necessarily that each person has one exact job and they have to find that exact job as soon as they're reach an adult or as soon as they can and stay in it for their entire life. And at least in the modern world, it's very unlikely that a person will be in the exact same job their entire life. So that's one of the key differentiators, is that we give a framework. Okay, yes, you do have to shift from job to job, but what is the constant that allows you to shift in a way that still preserves your values and your satisfaction and your fulfillment? It doesn't mean that you have to be infinitely adaptable. You can be somewhat adaptable when you have those constraints as your framework.
Maybe we can skip just breaking down all of the different fields and what they are, and people can look at the book if they want to understand that more, because that might take a while. But one question I did want to get to is, did traditional societies understand this? And if so, maybe a few examples, and then what went wrong?
So many traditional societies did have some version of these fields, and they might be called by different names, and they did have some kind of a division of a labor. So for instance, you might have the shaman versus the warrior in some kinds of society, or the priest versus the knight versus the merchant in some other kind of society. And various things have gone wrong, and I have to say that we didn't go through the history of what happened in each different society. There's a saying, it's from Anna Karenina. There's this famous line by Tolstoy that all happy families are alike, and every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. So what went wrong may actually be different from society to society. So I can only say what I have seen a little bit during my own lifetime, which is a very small snapshot of what's been going on for hundreds of years, which is that certain people have actually wanted to bamboozle others and exploit them. And so that has, so mixing of fields, which we describe in our book, which I don't think we'll have time to go into, it leads to corruption. People who actually want to take advantage of that corruption, they have given people the idea that they can do things that belong to one field that they're not actually suited to. So I do remember the early days of the internet, and the very early days of the internet, there was actually no such thing as spam. It was because spam is these commercial emails. And in the very, very early days of the internet, there were no really commercial entities exchanging email. It was just a sort of a research system. So I was part of I first got internet as part of AT&T, which was the telecommunications monopoly in the United States. And then I was part of a college, Caltech, so there was internet there, and there were very, very few entities that had internet. So then spam, the very first thing that people were trying to say was make money quick, and they would get people into all kinds of schemes by saying, oh, well, you can trade stock options, and then they would give you these examples of, these people have made this much money by trading stock options, and you enlist with us, and then you'll also be able to make so much money trading stock options. And I actually even learned about stock options myself for some time. I did learn something of the theory behind it. And I personally found that I couldn't do it because I couldn't do it because I'm a mathematician, so I did mathematically figure out what was the theory that would probably make money. But I kept thinking, so this is a zero-sum game where there's a competition between me and another faceless person, and I'm basically just taking money from that person, and because I'm right and they're wrong, I just want to be right more than they are. And so, I mean, there are situations where that's what happens, but that was not my field. I'm in the field of ideas, and it just didn't feel satisfying to me. I was imagining, okay, so suppose this person on the other end, it's actually the person who has been taken in by one of these scam artists, and it's actually, some, grandmother who doesn't have enough retirement savings and is desperately trying to make money through these stock options. And I have no idea that that's who it is. And since I'm better at this, then I'm taking her money, right? That could be that situation. So this is sort of a very abstract theoretical thing that probably most people don't think of. So that could be one reason why it wasn't suitable to me. But for most people, I mean, it's really in the field of resources. It's not their field, right? So they won't be able to make money that way.
On that point, I have got some questions about stock market investing. Like, at what point is it gambling? Because, we think of it as a field of resources. If somebody wants to, like, we need to pull some resources out of the ground. There's a startup, they want to search for it, then they find it. So you put some money up, and if they find it and that's the company successful, you make tons of money. You've contributed something. But like options trading, you're not helping any of those businesses get ahead. So I don't think there's any, even for the field of resources, I don't think options trading is, I mean,
well, yeah, you put your finger on a corruption of the fields. And, we have one of the principles are that work should be honest and should be adding real value.
All four fields.
There is actually some use, which especially when you start learning about options, they'll tell you about this use. There is some use to the field of options, which is as insurance.
Commodities futures.
Yes, or for instance, so a farmer has their crop in the ground, and they don't know what the weather will be, and they want to be able to predict what their income will be when they harvest it. So that risk is laid off to the person who writes the option and says, okay, I will pay you this much money for the crop in the ground. even though we don't know, whether there will be the market will be flooded because there was a huge harvest, or whether and so the price will be low, or whether the price will be high. I will pay you the money, so then you just grow the crop and you won't have to worry about. I mean, you just have to worry that you will be able to provide the amount that you put in the option. Mm-hmm. So that is a function, but in terms of, that's actually been dwarfed in options trading by the speculators, and now the speculators aren't even human beings; they're algorithms.
Oh, bot trading.
So, I mean, at one point I was looking into options for myself, and then at another point, there was someone who actually wanted to hire me, knowing as I'm a mathematician, to come up with some new strategy. And so at that point I was looking into it, and at that point I found that there had been mathematicians in the past, like decades before, who through their mathematical acumen had made a lot of money in options. So Simons is a famous mathematician who started that way, with mathematical acumen. But at this point, someone was making money because there was arbitrage between Chicago and New York. And they found that, okay, well, if we can lay fiber between Chicago and New York, then we can get the information about how is it trading in Chicago a few milliseconds before the. So they actually bought up the right of way and went, thousands of miles, laid this fiber in a straight line between those two marketplaces, and so it was no longer a case of like human intelligence. It had become a case of getting, and in order to take advantage of that, like a human wouldn't be able to take advantage of those few milliseconds. It was all algorithms. So I told this person that we only had like a couple of investors, that this time has passed for this kind of small scale effort, and now this is the time for the big algorithms and the optimization and the hardware.
Yeah, I watched a little documentary about that kind of high frequency trading, and one of the comments made was quite cutting. It was like, one time point out, this guy was saying he was looking around the floor and there was like doctors, like mathematicians, like all sorts of people that could be out there in the world actually contributing to society. And here they were making bucket loads of money. Basically, they were, somebody would put in an order to buy a stock. They would get the purchase before them and then sell it to them and take a tiny percentage on top of the trade. Contributes nothing to society. They're just literally skimming a little bit of money off the top of all these transactions. And there's like, this person could be out there, like, being a doctor, for example.
Yes, I was in that generation when there were people who were being siphoned off from various fields into becoming quants. They're called, quantitative analysts for this kind of firm.
Well, one of the things we discussed in our book is that it's not just a question of being in the right field, but one has to do work that's honest work and that's work of value. I mean, you're talking about specifically in resources, but it can be the same in any field. The work you have to represent your goods and services honestly. You have to pay people an honest price if you're employing other people, and you have to not fudge things. And then you've got to do things that are of real value to the society, certainly not harmful like tobacco, alcohol, and so forth. And also that's not some sort of artificial so-called need, but that genuinely helps society. If you don't do that, then your work is corrupt, even if you're so-called in the right field. And beyond that is to work with love, to get free of what we call the cycle of frustration. Where you're doing your right Dharma and you're getting your prosperity and you're getting your pleasure, but, you're still within just materialistic laws of karma. And to go beyond that, to do work with love for yourself, with love for your work, with love for the people you're serving, with love for the planet, and ultimately with love for God, with love for our source, with love for the divine. And when you do that, the value that you add in your work and the level of honesty of your work goes beyond an ordinary calculation. But I think you've put your finger on what's gone wrong. Yes, ancient societies, as Rukmini said, all have some version of this understanding. And what goes wrong is things become corrupted. That's our tendency in this world, is to become corrupt. There's for this famous Bhagavad Gita verse, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhutanam adharmasya. When dharma becomes adharma, when it gets distorted, the world is like this in general. Like, you can't just clean your room once, you have to keep cleaning it. You can't just bathe one time in your life, you have to keep bringing things back to purity over and over and over and over again. You have to keep making a course correction. And that's just the way it is in the world. Things are going to veer towards the corrupt. That's just going to be our tendency. You've talked about one example.
Something specific that we discuss in the later part of our book, part 3, is that there has been a specific corruption, which is to redefine the word value and equate it with whatever people exchange money for. Almost make that the definition of the value. And so, for instance, you just described high-frequency trading. I actually had a discussion with a person who was getting his PhD in math and then was going off to do high-frequency trading. And he was explaining that, we actually make the market price accurate by doing this trading, and that has value to society. So it's not the case that we're not providing any value. And so that is part of a sort of philosophy of economics, or what is value, that has become an ideology. And unfortunately, there's a whole infrastructure around it that builds it up and gives it a kind of a veneer of intellectual backing. And that's a particular corruption that has become widespread and is kind of subtle, like people don't realize it. Or they actually may realize that something is wrong. I think a lot of people these days are realizing that something is wrong. But how exactly it came about, that's something that fewer people realize. And then the ones who do realize it, there's not that many of those who are involved in mathematics, which is kind of what is needed to overturn it, because it's talking about how value is a quantitative thing. What would the real value be like? So there's a lot of people saying, okay, well, your values are wrong. This doesn't make sense, and there has been a lot of protest. It's or heterodoxy, as they say, in the last few decades. But it tends to be that the people who make those protests, they're not the people who use the heavy-duty mathematics. So that's one thing that definitely differentiates our book from many others, is that we mention that just because mathematics has been misused in constructing these ill-founded theories of value, that's not the fault of mathematics. That's the fault of how it was misused, and it can be correctly used.
So the three things I had left that we could talk about are, people could misunderstand, as soon as you put people in categories, and people are going to want to start saying, oh, I'm better than you because I'm in this category, or, this person's better than you because they're in that category. And obviously that's a mistaken way of looking at that, because everyone's equal. The other point is, different psychological systems seem to, like, you know, different ways of putting people in careers seem to look at it this completely differently. This seems to be looking at people based on their motivations, what makes them tick. You spoke about the opulences, and then whereas, so, you know, like typically it'd be like, well, you know, you're really good at, you know, dealing with screaming children, so you can work in a daycare, or, you know, you're really good at explaining things, so you can do this. But the skill of explaining things is maybe not the same thing as being in the field of ideas. It could just be that somebody is articulate. And then there's the last point is, but like everybody needs to invest, right? So do we just give our money to a hedge fund and let them invest it? Or should we also just do a little bit just for our own benefit of studying and figuring out where to put our wealth in order to grow it, because we want to retire and we want our kids to have some wealth in the future?
On the first two, there's a tendency in this world for everybody to think they're better than everybody else. It's just that tendency. And if I don't do it for myself, I do it for my group. You know, the Kiwis are better than everybody else. The Aussies are better than everybody else. Whatever, you know, whatever group we're in, my football team's better.
Just tell me whether you're on iPhone or Android, and I'll automatically know a lot of things about you.
Exactly.
We give the example in our book of different cell types in the body. So, for instance, there's a lot of cells that are in the lining of your gut, and then there's a few cells that are in your thyroid, but all of them, these cells, they all came from a single cell, and they're all related to one another. And in fact, generally they're genetically identical. So they're all equal cells. It's just they each have different roles to play. And any one of them, all of those roles are needed in the body, and they need to work together. So it's not that if you're in the gut, then you're a normal cell because there's lots of them, so that must be the normal thing. Or it's not that if you're in the thyroid, then you're an elite cell because there's a few of them, so it's an elite thing. It's just each of them has a different role, and they're all doing what they need to do. And since they're all identical, they're actually equal.
I had somebody yesterday say to me, well, shouldn't everybody try to be in the field of ideas? And like, would you want a society of just floating heads? Yeah. I said, that's just not going to work, you know. I said, society would immediately fall apart. So, yeah, I mean, everybody in every field is providing something that's of great value. And that tend to be exploitive. And the second point you asked was about?
The different ways of analyzing different psychological types.
Yes.
There's astrology, there's Myers-Briggs, there's the Big Five.
Yeah, we talk about this in the book. And certainly if you're going to look at what career is suitable for you, those things could be helpful as part of the process. You know, these different ways of analyzing personality or this and that certainly can be part of what you look at. We're not denying their usefulness. What's wonderful about the framework that we use is it's coming from ancient wisdom, and it's actually coming from our source. It's something that's stable. It's been stable throughout human society, that there are these 4 types of work and people with these 4 basic values and inclinations. So even as things shift over time, that remains. But yeah, these other things can certainly be helpful to give you some specificity within those frameworks.
Yeah, we looked at some assessments, and some of them have some kind of a correlation, but they're not really this particular division, so they wouldn't exactly work the same way. So for instance, we mentioned the study of values questionnaire. That is about what motivates you in work, but he comes up with 6 types, which we would maybe map differently than he did. This was in the early 20th century, and so forth. There's various correlations, but there's not an existing system that we are aware of that maps to the 4 fields quite the way that they were in the ancient wisdom.
Also, I've come to at least a tentative conclusion that people want to take a computer scored exam or just look at their astrological chart and have someone just say, that's what you should do. And that this ancient system has much more deals with deeply knowing oneself, having some deep introspection coupled with input from wise people who know you. And I've just been seeing over and over again in doing individual consultations with people, sometimes it take 2 minutes and sometimes it take 2 hours, where someone will say, well, I don't know if I'm this or I'm that. And you just, well, but what about this? And they go, oh, yeah, that's what I really want to do. And they see it for themselves. They get filled with wisdom. Rather than you fill out some questionnaire and the computer says, just as what you should do. And they're filled with insight. And I see that aspect as the beauty of this, one of the beauties of this system that really can't be replicated with these other sorts of tests. They're looking at something, that's not as deeply ingrained in the person.
I don't think you're ever going to replace the wise words of somebody who actually knows you with some personality test.
And the wise words from your own heart.
Right.
That are brought out with someone who really knows you. All right, I have to attend to this.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we can wrap it up there.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
All right, thank you.
Dandavat pranams, Hare Krishna.